Hello dear students, welcome to Alam Academy. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic in science and the name of the topic is friction. Friction or frictional force impacts on our life very much. Now first we try to understand the definition of friction. So as per the definition we know that friction is a force which is applied by the surface which is in contact with the moving object or the object which is about to move. It means that let's say that if there is an object which is kept at somewhere and we try to push that object and the object does not move or about to move, so the friction is also working there. And let's say that if the object is already in motion and the force is being applied on that, so the friction also works there for stopping that object. Now let's take an example. As in the figure you can see that there is an object which is kept on the earth's surface and a man is trying to push the objects. Now the frictional force works in the opposite direction of the motion of that object. If the applied force is greater than the frictional force, then the object will move, otherwise the object will be at rest. Now as students, frictional force is applied by all kinds of surfaces like solid, liquid and gas. Now as in the figure you can see here that the frictional force is opposite to the direction of motion of plane and swimmer. In these two cases, in the first case, the friction force is being applied by the gas or the air, and in the second case, as you can see here, that the frictional force is being applied by the liquid or water on the swimmer. Now we talk about the cause of friction. Why friction takes place? So the main cause of friction is due to surface irregularities of the two objects in contact. Objects looks smoother but in reality grooves and valleys are present on its surfaces which causes friction. Adhesive force is also a reason of friction. Now question arises, what is adhesive force? So it is a force of attraction that takes place between the molecules of different substances. Now the figure illustrates here that it has how irregularities are present on the surface of objects. Now we discuss the types of friction. Now as you can see here that there are three types of friction. The first one is static, second one is sliding friction, third one is rolling friction. First we discuss about the static friction. So as per the definition of static friction we can see here that the frictional force that comes into play until an object starts moving is called static friction. Or we can say that from the name itself it is quite clear. Static means that something which is not moving, it which is at rest. So it means that if the object is at rest and a force is working on that, when we try to move that object in the opposite direction of the applied force, then that force is called static friction. Now, an object has to overcome the static friction force in order to start its movement. Now we take an example here. The man is trying to move the box but he is unable to do it due to static friction. Now here the static friction is greater than the applied force, due to that the box is not moving from its position. Now we move to sliding friction. So as per the definition of sliding friction, it comes into play whenever an object slides over the surface of another object. Now we take an example here. As you can see here that the pencil is being slide on the surface of paper and that's the reason it is able to write there. So sliding friction is weaker than the static friction. I believe you all have understood it. The next friction we have, that is rolling friction. So when an object is rolling on a surface, the force of friction which acts upon it is called rolling friction. Rolling friction is much weaker than the sliding friction or static friction. Now in the figure as you can see here that we have a wheel and it is rolling. So the friction force which is working in the opposite direction of the motion of this wheel, that frictional force is called rolling friction. Next type of friction we have, that is fluid friction. So fluid friction is friction that acts on objects that are moving through a fluid. This fluid friction force is also called drag. Now the question comes here that what is fluid? So a fluid is a substance that can flow and take the shape of its container. So as we all know that liquids and gases are the substance which can flow and take the shape of any container. So liquids and gases comes under fluids. Now from the figure we can easily understand that the liquids and gases also exert frictional force on the objects. In the first figure, as we can see here, that the air exerts a frictional force on the plane. The red arrow indicates the direction of frictional force while the yellow arrow indicates the direction of motion. So these two arrows are in opposite direction. It means that the frictional force always acts in the opposite direction of the motion of object. Now we talk about some advantages of friction. Friction enable us to write on the paper. It means that if there is no friction, so we cannot write anything on the paper. Let's say that if you apply some oil on the paper, so will you be able to write on that paper? No. Friction between our feet and the ground allows our movements like standing, walking, and running. Friction between the surface of the road and tires of our vehicles allow the vehicles to move without slipping. So there are so many things in which the friction helps us a lot. Now we talk about some disadvantages of friction. Friction causes moving objects to stop or slow down. Now as you know that if you throw a ball on the ground after some times it stops. Why? Just because of frictional force. Friction produces heat causing wastage of energy in machines. Now you can also observe that if you rub your hand due to the friction between your palm, the heat is produced. Friction results in wear and tear of moving parts of machinery, soles of shoes, tires of vehicles, etc. Dear students, as we can see in the picture that due to the frictional force, the sole of the shoe is about to end. So these are the disadvantages of friction. So students, I believe that you all have understood the different terms of friction in this chapter. If you have not subscribed the Alam Academy, subscribe it and access all the educational videos. Thank you very much.